So for him to take her order and go, what about you? What do you like? And you're just like, he knows what she likes. It is a wild thing to say, and it was not in the script, and it was crazy. When I found that in the edit, I was like, oh my God, why is this not in the movie? And then it became it was not just my favorite moment, but just everybody in that room was like that line. And then we started quoting it every time we ordered lunch. It was like, I'm getting this, I'm getting the yuzu salmon.
What you like?
Sweet greens, what about you?
Hey friends, here's what's going on with Blake Lively in court, and it's honestly very strange. Turns out that Blake used a company she owns called Vanzan Inc. to file a lawsuit in New York, back in September 2024. What's odd is that the lawsuit wasn't actually against anyone. It didn't name a defendant, yet it was accepted and filed. Through that case, Vanzan subpoenaed Stephanie Jones and her company, Jones Works, asking for all of the phone data and records connected to someone named Jen Abel. The problem: Jen Abel had nothing to do with Vanzan Inc. at all. She didn't work there, wasn't connected to the company, and wasn't involved in the lawsuit in any way. Now Jen is trying to get access to that subpoena and to all the records that were given to Jones Works. She wants to know what was handed over, and also wants to understand how this hidden legal process happened without her knowledge. The whole thing feels like it was done in secret, to avoid Jen being notified or being able to respond. No public records showed anything about it, and it didn't mention any sexual harassment claims, which makes the purpose behind it even more confusing. What's becoming clear is that Blake Lively used Vanzan Inc. as a legal disguise to protect herself while getting sensitive information about Jen. The lawsuit was used as a tool to gather discovery or evidence without following the usual process. Then Blake's team added a protective order to the case, which includes a rule that if something is marked confidential, it can't be used elsewhere. It can't be shared, and the person receiving it has to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Basically, even if Jen gets those documents, she can't use them publicly or in any other legal action. Blake's team then taunted Jen by saying she already had the documents she was asking for, but they were locked inside this unrelated court case marked confidential and unusable. So they handed her the evidence but tied her hands behind her back, saying she's not allowed to do anything with it. That's why Jen's lawyers had to go to court and say, look, this shell company belongs to Blake Lively, and they used it to get private information without following the rules. To make things even more suspicious, Vanzan has now hired a completely different law firm to handle their part of the case. At first, they were being represented by the same attorneys working for Blake. Now they're acting like they have no connection at all. That shift suggests that someone is trying hard to make the court believe these are two separate things, when in fact, they're not. Watching this unfold in court feels unsettling. It looks like an intentional misuse of the legal system. If the judge accepts any of this as valid, it will feel like justice doesn't matter. The entire situation seems cruel and manipulative. And when Blake's legal team accused Jen and Wayfair of using this for media attention, it felt like another distraction to shift the blame. Blake's lawyers claim that Jen already has the records and is pretending she doesn't, just to keep the story in the spotlight. But none of this explains why the original case was filed or how it's connected to Jen. They keep avoiding that basic question: why did Vanzan Inc. open a lawsuit to collect data on someone unrelated to their business? This is one of the clearest examples of someone using legal power to hide the truth, and it's deeply unfair to those on the receiving end. This situation is basically Blake Lively talking about herself while pretending it's not. She's using her own company, Vanzan Inc., to argue against things connected to her, but acting like they're completely separate. Now she's saying that Vanzan has been uncooperative, even though the person on the other side, Jen Abel, stopped communicating for 3 weeks and then suddenly filed a legal motion without any warning. Blake's team is trying to spin the story and make it look like Jen is always playing the victim. Blake's lawyers say the court should reject Jen's motion for 2 key reasons. First, they claim Jen already has the important documents connected to the subpoena that was sent during the earlier lawsuit. Second, they argue that anything else Jen is asking for isn't useful in the current case, doesn't relate to the claims being discussed, or could be asked from someone else. Even though they say Jen's requests don't matter, Vanzan's team is still offering to share some of the information to help speed things up, and avoid bothering the court with extra steps. They've said, they will hand over documents related to certain requests, specifically numbers 1, 4, 10, and 11, some of which they say Jen already has. But for request number 9, which asks for communication between Van's lawyers, Stephanie Jones, and Jones Works, they believe Jen should just ask Stephanie Jones directly. Blake's team recently used the same argument when other employees were asked for similar documents. If the judge decides differently this time, it would seem inconsistent. And that's why there's concern about whether the court is being fair. Blake's lawyers also say Jen left out some important facts. For example, Jen didn't tell the court that she walked away from the negotiation process. Before filing the motion, Vanzan had offered to cooperate and share some of the documents, including the subpoena sent to Stephanie Jones and the information that came from her in response. Vanzan's team confirmed this plan by email on May 30th and said they were open to further discussion. Jen never replied. At that point, Jen had already received the documents more than a week earlier. But 3 weeks later, she filed a motion. Anyway, without telling anyone in advance, now she's acting as if she never got those files. What she leaves out is that there was a protective order on those documents, meaning they were restricted and couldn't be used freely. That's likely the real issue. She had the files, but legally couldn't do anything with them. Blake's lawyers argue that Jen hasn't shown why the documents matter in this lawsuit. They believe she's just guessing that the information helps her case. Her counterclaims are currently facing a motion to dismiss, so they might not even be considered valid in court. The bottom line from Blake's side is that Jen is pushing a theory without enough proof and creating unnecessary complications in the legal process. This entire legal situation seems like a carefully planned delay strategy. Blake Lively's legal team appears to be stalling in the hope that the judge, who already seems biased in their favor, will eventually throw out Jen Abel's claims without looking at the full picture. They seem convinced that they've already won and that the court won't take Jen's experiences seriously. They're banking on the judge overlooking the suspicious actions connected to Blake's shell company, Vanzan Inc., which is at the center of all this confusion. If the judge ignores the Vanzan lawsuit, then most of the current arguments might be dismissed altogether. Jen Abel is urging the court to pay attention and not allow her case to be thrown out. Her legal claims are about employment issues between her and her former boss, Stephanie Jones, not about Vanzan. But if Vanzan had nothing to do with Jen, why did Vanzan get access to all the data from her phone? That's the big question that nobody seems willing to answer. Starting to look like this was all coordinated. Blake sued Wayfair. Stephanie Jones sued Jen and another person. May trying to make it look like Jen and her team were the ones causing trouble, it appears. Blake wants to pretend she had no part in getting the data. She's pushing all the responsibility onto Stephanie Jones. The truth is, the phone and data were taken when Jen was fired in August 2024, weeks before Vanzan's lawsuit began. So how did Vanzan know where to find the phone? Oh, did they know? Who had it? These aren't coincidences. They suggest a setup. Vanzan's legal team claims they're not involved in any of the current lawsuits involving Blake Lively. But the reality is that Blake's own lawyers admitted they used Vanzan to get access to the discovery materials they now claim don't matter. They're saying Jen is only asking for these documents to keep the story going in the media, not for any legal reason. They argue she already has these files, or can ask someone else for them, like Stephanie Jones, who is now refusing to share anything, to resolve things quietly. Vanzan agreed to provide some basic documents and said they'd share their companies, public records, and board information. However, for one request conversations between Vanzan and Jones Works, they say Jen should go to Stephanie for that. But Stephanie is refusing, which blocks Jen again. Emails exchanged on May 30th show that Vanzan asked Jen if she had the subpoena materials. But because of a protective order, Jen wasn't allowed to confirm that she had them. The order states that if something is marked confidential, it cannot be shared or used in any other case. If someone breaks that rule, they could be charged with contempt of court. Now, Vanzan is demanding that Wayfair break that order and tell them what. Jen has something the law doesn't allow in their objections. Blake's team even accused Jen of using the lawsuit as a publicity stunt. They say she's trying to distract from her own alleged wrongdoing. But what's strange is they keep saying Jen already has her communications, even though her phone was taken and she hasn't had access to any of her data since. They claim Jen is trying to distract from accusations, that she helped spread false stories about Blake in response to Blake being accused of allowing sexual harassment on a film set. What's ironic is that when you actually look at the messages Jen sent, they don't show any plan to attack Blake. Instead, she was comforting Justin, encouraging him, and helping him stay strong. No? There was no real evidence that she was plotting anything harmful. The only questionable moment might be someone calling Blake a name-and. It's unclear if that was even Jen or someone else. Either way, it's not enough to say she launched a smear campaign. Blake and her team had already decided that anyone who spoke up against them was running a smear campaign. That idea was already in place before Melissa was even brought into the situation. Now they're gathering only the pieces of evidence that support that claim, ignoring everything else that doesn't fit the narrative. Stephanie Jones may have been the one who accessed Jen's private phone data and handed it to Leslie, who then passed it to others. But Blake is staying silent about all of that. There were confidentiality agreements between Stephanie and Wayfair, between Stephanie and Jen, so she had no legal right to give that data away. Now, to make things even more intense, Stephanie is trying to find out who created social media pages that are leaking negative stories about her. She's asked Meta and Pinterest to hand over information about who's behind the accounts, but both platforms are refusing. She thinks some of Melissa and Nathan's employees are behind it, though it's not proven. These pages only have one sentence about Stephanie and no posts. One says she leaks client info to make herself look like a hero, and another says she sends out false legal letters to threaten people. Even if those things were true, they may not be legally considered defamatory. Some of those claims are based on opinion or actual events. In fact, the person writing this says they've also received a legal letter from Stephanie with false accusations. If that's true, it wouldn't be considered defamation. So in the end, it all comes down to how far someone can go using the legal system to scare others and hide the truth. This legal fight keeps getting messier, and now there are more accusations being thrown around. Stephanie Jones believes that two former employees, Miss Costa and Miss Casey's, helped create websites and social media pages meant to damage her reputation. These two have worked with Melissa Nathan's PR company, the Agency Group, and before that, Miss Casey's used to work at Jones Works. Now, Stephanie is suggesting that Melissa Nathan is also part of this effort to harm her. But the people involved haven't confirmed or denied whether they had anything to do with the websites or fake accounts in cases like this. If someone sends a subpoena to Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, Meta will usually inform the account holder unless it's a criminal investigation. Since this is a civil matter, it's possible Meta let the account owner know. Stephanie thinks this is all part of a bigger plan, possibly including Justin Baldoni, to ruin her and her business. She says that a group of people secretly planned, for months, to damage her reputation and take her clients. But here's the thing. When Business Insider published an article in August 2024 titled "Asterisk Who's Afraid of Stephanie Jones?" Asterisk, they claimed to have spoken to many former employees and clients. It wasn't just a few people with complaints. It was dozens. They all described negative experiences, and that's not something that can easily be brushed off as a conspiracy. Stephanie claims that Jen Abel and Melissa Nathan teamed up with Business Insider to leak information and plant that article. She even says that Jen used her position at Jones Works to secretly hire Nathan and shut Stephanie out of meetings. And Stephanie says this was all done to make Baldoni look better by hurting his co-star. She's trying to say that she wasn't involved in those decisions and that it wasn't part of her job. But according to Jen Abel, she actually found out about the article from Stephanie, not Melissa. The article was very critical of Stephanie and mentioned a website called Stephanie Jones Leaks that accused her of being aggressive and losing big clients. Stephanie says that's false, but she hasn't sued Business Insider over it, which raises questions. She also says Abel encouraged the article and even helped Business Insider reach out to her past clients to turn them against her. Stephanie believes Abel and Nathan were celebrating in private when the article came out, calling it a kill story. Abel was also allegedly working behind the scenes to get clients like Baldone and Wayfair to leave Jones Works and join her new firm. Stephanie insists all of this was done to destroy her career, and now she's blaming fake websites and accounts that posted critical things about her. For example, a Facebook page used her name and claimed she sent legal threats based on lies. A Pinterest account accused her of leaking client info to make herself look like a hero. She says these statements aren't true, but it's worth noting that some of the accusations match up with things that have happened, like information being passed from Jen's phone to Blake Lively's team. It all leads to the question, is this a case of real defamation? Or is it people speaking out about things that actually happened? Stephanie is trying to present herself as the victim of a smear campaign, but some of what's being said about her appears to be based on real events. If she really did pass along private client information or acted unethically in her role, then maybe what's being said isn't false after all. The bigger problem here is how PR professionals are using legal systems, fake accounts, and media stories to attack each other. It's manipulative and deeply unprofessional. If you work in this business, you have to be ready for public criticism, especially if you've built your brand by controlling public narratives. It's not okay to use the same tactics you once used on others to now silence people who are calling you out. Even if someone did make those pages, the United States protects freedom of speech. As long as they aren't lying or breaking the law, they have the right to express their opinions, even if those opinions are uncomfortable or damaging. That's the tough reality of being a public figure. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss future videos.